The Assassin. You know I break necks, call me Jack Tate. I have no regrets while your life is fading. I'm a crazy fuck equivalent to Satan. When I'm behind the mic, I feel like the greatest. You know I break necks, call me Jack Tate. I have no regrets while your life is fading. I'm a crazy fuck equivalent to Satan. When I'm behind the mic, I feel like the greatest.
What up, y'all? You're listening to Sports Talk with Tropp, and I'm your host, Katie Tropp. Well, damn, some motherfuckers balled out hard this weekend, so let's go ahead and just start the episode off with my Tropp 10 NBA power rankings. Let's go ahead, and I've had some shakeups this week. Some Eastern Conference teams really dropped some Western Conference teams in my rankings this week. So even one of the teams that I usually have ranked up high actually dropped out of my top 10 this week because they're not playing well right now, and my Tropp 10 NBA power rankings, they're based upon how you've been playing recently. Of course, your history, it does matter over the course of time, but man, if you have a good week or a good couple of weeks, then you're definitely going to take the top spot. And that also, if you have a bad week, you could tumble a little bit. So let's listen to a couple of the shakeups here, starting off with my number one Tropp 10 NBA power ranked team this week, the Boston Celtics. They have taken over the top spot this week, and it's because, first of all, they have won 14 out of their last 16 games. So they've basically been winning the last couple of weeks. And they've actually been building even before the All-Star break. They've been playing great basketball right now. They've been climbing the top 10 over the past couple of weeks. And with the way a couple other teams played, especially out in the Western Conference, they were able to take over the top spot. They're on a 3-game winning streak right now. They beat the Nets, they beat the Memphis Grizzlies, and they beat the Atlanta Hawks. So those aren't chump teams. They've actually had a good week by beating those 3 good teams. They're 39-27 overall. I think they're fourth in the Eastern Conference right now. But I mean, they're just playing great basketball. Jason Tatum dropped 54 points yesterday against the Nets. Him and Kevin Durant were going back and forth in the fourth quarter, and just Jason Tatum happened to outduel him. Kevin Durant ended up with 36 points, but it was just a battle back and forth between Tatum and Durant. It was just one dude going back and forth up in the court, and he'd knock down the shot. Then the next guy would go. It was just a great matchup between the two of them. But the Celtics got the best of the Nets, and they are my number one ranked team this week just because they continue to build, they continue to get stronger. I don't know if I believe in them yet to be a championship contender, but as far as my NBA power rankings, they are the number one team this week. The number 2 on my Tropp 10 NBA power rankings would be the Miami Heat. They are also playing great. The only reason why I put the Celtics above them is just because of how well the Celtics have been playing for the last couple of weeks, whereas the Heat has basically just been about the last week and a half. It's good. They got Victor Oladipo back. It's the first time he's playing since he was injured, and when he was traded to the Heat, and he was injured while he was traded to the Heat. So this is basically the first time he's been playing for the Heat, and I think they're already a good team, and he's only going to make them better. Overall, they're 43-22. They're on a 2-game winning streak, and they're 8-2 over their last 10 games. Then number 3 on my Tropp 10 NBA power rankings, the Phoenix Suns. They're 51-13 overall, but you can tell they're really struggling without Chris Paul. They play good basketball, but they started yesterday's game off really well against the Bucks. But the Bucks just turned it on the second half and were able to just smother them. And you could just tell that they really are missing Chris Paul. I still expect them to be one of the top teams in the league. The lead that they've built so far, it really helps them, especially with the time off that CP3 is going to miss here. But they really need to get their act together because the playoffs are only like a month away. So they really need to get things going. And if they want to remain the top seed out west, they're going to have to keep winning. And right now, they had a bad week. They just lost, like I said, they just lost yesterday to the Bucks. And they've fallen to number 3 on my Tropp 10 NBA power rankings. Then number 4 on my Tropp 10 NBA power rankings are the Milwaukee Bucks. Just talking about them. They're 40-25 overall, but they're on a 4-game winning streak, and one of the teams that they beat was the Phoenix Suns. They're 6-4 in their last 10 games, but they're really playing great basketball, just great team basketball. They play great on the defensive side of the ball, and all of their role players seem to step up when they need to step up, especially in the close games like yesterday and the game a couple games before. I can't recall what game it was last week that they played, where they just had a great game and ended up winning the game. I think it was actually against the Nets. But that's just how they're playing great basketball. They're not blowing anybody out, but they're still a championship caliber team, and they're climbing up my Tropp 10 NBA power rankings. Then at number 5 on my Tropp 10 NBA power rankings, I have the Philadelphia 76ers, 39-24 overall. And every game that James Harden has played, which is 3 out of 4 games that they've played since the trade, he has won. He didn't play yesterday, so they lost yesterday. But he's proven that so far he was worth the trade. And they're playing great basketball. And in my opinion, they are probably the best team out east, and probably the team to beat out east, especially because James Harden playing great. I don't know how he's going to play during the playoffs. That's always his downfall, but right now the 76ers are looking solid. Then number 6 on my Tropp 10 NBA power rankings, that would be the Memphis Grizzlies. They've fallen a couple spots this week, just because they've been up and down this week. They've had a win here and there. You know, Ja Morant, he had that 52-point game against the Spurs, so that was a great game. But then they lost the following game after that. They're 6-4 overall in their last 10 games. So they're still playing good basketball. It's just these other 5 teams above them played better this past couple of weeks. So I dropped the Grizzlies down to number 6. Moving up to number 7 on my Tropp 10 NBA power rankings are the Dallas Mavericks. They're on a 4-game winning streak right now, 8-2 in their last 10 games, 39-25 overall, and they're just playing spectacular basketball. They really... Dinwiddie has really proven that that was a good trade move for the Mavericks to make. I thought getting rid of Porzingis was essential to them, but I didn't really think Dinwiddie was going to be like a key piece to what they're doing right now. And he really is. He really stepped it up the other night too when Luka Doncic was out. So, but the Mavericks just playing great defense, playing great offense. They're a solid team. I don't know what they're going to do come playoff time, but right now they're playing great basketball. Then number 8 on my Tropp 10 NBA power rankings are the Utah Jazz, 40-23 overall, 8-2 in the last 10 games. Had a solid week. They just continue to get better as the season carries on, and they've really been playing really great basketball since the All-Star break. So I expect them to make some noise come the postseason. Then number 9 on the Tropp 10 NBA power rankings are the Denver Nuggets. They're 38-26 overall. They're on a 2-game winning streak right now, 8-2 in their last 10 games. And last night they had a spectacular game from Nikola Jokic, the reigning MVP, who is just making another case to possibly get another MVP this year. Last night they took the Pelicans to overtime, ended up with a 138-130 overtime win, and Jokic's stat line ended up being 46 points, 12 rebounds, 11 assists, 4 blocks, and 3 steals. And those are big numbers right there. I believe that's like the first time in history, or that's barely ever happened in NBA history. So he had a historic game. And those are just crazy numbers. That just goes to show how much of the team runs through Jokic. And in the fourth quarter alone, he scored 30 points and went 10 for 11 from the field. So he's playing great, and the Denver Nuggets, they're playing some solid basketball right now for sure. And then rounding out the Tropp 10 NBA power rankings are the Chicago Bulls, 39-25 right now. They're 6-4 in their last 10 games, and they're on a 4-game losing streak. It was actually really difficult for me to pick the number 10 team because I went back and forth between them and the Warriors, who completely fell out of my top 10 this week because right now they are also on a 4-game losing streak. And the only reason why I put them below the Bulls is just because they're 2-8 overall in their last 10 games, whereas the Bulls are 6-4. So the Bulls have had a better couple of weeks rather than the Warriors. And you could tell they really need Draymond Green back. They need that. They need that toughness in the middle. Clay's playing well. Steph's playing well. They just need that dude in the middle who's going to get you those rebounds and throw those elbows and get those dudes out of the way. So I kind of feel like once they get him back, they're going to get their toughness back. But until then, they're really going through the motions right now and not having a good time. And so I expect them to still be one of the top teams out west. I still expect them to actually be a championship contender, and I expect them to get much better once Draymond's back. But I did go back and forth between them and the Bulls at number 10 because both of them they've both had a shitty week. But overall, Warriors aren't playing so well right now. And actually, one of the teams the Warriors lost to were my Lakers. They actually showed up on Saturday night. Now, you got to thank LeBron James because he was one of the many dudes this week who just dropped 50 points, and he ended up dropping 56 points on Golden State. And it was fun to watch just because it was one of those games, because that's the thing about LeBron. We all know he could take over a game at any point in time. And he knows he could take over a game at any point in time. But for some reason, he has that, like, Phil Jackson mentality. Like, when Phil Jackson was the coach of the Lakers, he used to, when they would get in a slump, usually most coaches will call a timeout if your team starts getting in a slump. Not Phil Jackson. He would make you play through it and play out of it and figure your way out of it. And then he would call a timeout down the line if necessary. And that's kind of how I view LeBron on the court sometimes, is where, like, he knows he could take over a game, but he knows he also has to get his team involved. Because, it's great to see him drop 56 points like that. It's great to see them actually get the win because they really needed that win. My opinion does not change over their season overall. They have no chemistry whatsoever, and I don't think they're going to be a legit playoff contender. I keep saying I wouldn't be shocked if they miss the playoffs. If they make the playoffs, it's probably going to be a one-and-done type deal. But I will say, a bright spot for this team all season has been Carmelo Anthony. I remember when they signed him, I was like, is this going to work out? Because I've actually always been a Carmelo fan. I've always liked his game. He's not a defensive guy, of course, but on offense, he's great. And he has a good shot as well. Like, he's just got one of the smoothest shots, and he's just an overall good basketball player. And I've always enjoyed his game, even when he was a Denver Nugget, because they used to have a rivalry with the Lakers back in the early 2000s and in his early days as well. So, but even then, I just really have enjoyed his game. And I remember when they signed him, I'm like, I don't know if he's too old now, if he's past his prime. But I actually think he's playing the role he needs to play. He's been coming off of the bench, and he's been doing well. And so, in my opinion, he's been one of the best bright spots aside from LeBron James this season for the Lakers, because there aren't many things to write home about with them. But I've really liked Carmelo, and in that game in particular against Golden State, he was one of the reasons why we played so well. Him and Malik, Malik Monk, they both stepped it up, and LeBron stepped it up, and they had a great game. And it was a good win against a good team. But my opinion on the Lakers has not changed. I'm going to have to see a little bit more from them chemistry-wise. And it looks like more and more that Russell Westbrook just really isn't working out with the Lakers, not only on the court, but there's been a whole bunch of reports this week about how there's so much tension around the building because of him. He doesn't seem to be listening to coaches. Players are trying to reach out to him, I guess. And he's just not interested. And so it sounds like both sides want to move on, which is good in my opinion. I never was on board with the Russell Westbrook trade to begin with. But it's good to know that that's what they're going to hopefully be doing in this offseason, because I think that was the biggest move they needed to make. While I said they may want to look to trade Anthony Davis, you could get a lot more for Westbrook, because at least he's a whole complete player, whereas Anthony Davis, he's injury prone, so who knows what his trade value is these days. And then just a random thing about the NBA that I just had to gripe on. The one and only thing that I did not miss during COVID, when NBA games were going on, were the motherfucking fashion shows we had to get from the players before the game as they're walking into the locker room. And they're always, it's one thing when you're wearing like a nice suit and you look good, or you're just wearing some nice shit. But then over the years, it's just gotten ridiculous. And, dudes have been walking in dresses. No fucking lie. Dudes have been walking in dresses and like capri pants. And last night, or it wasn't last night, I think it was actually Saturday night, I saw this shit and just was like, oh my God. I so did not miss the NBA fashion shows during COVID times. And one of them was Kyle Kuzma, and I can't remember who the other one was wearing them, but they were both wearing these fucking sweatshirts that looked like they were knitted for them by their grandma. And not only were they knitted sweaters, but Kyle Kuzma was wearing a pink one, and I hate the color pink. So if you think I'm gonna be one of those chicks who's like, oh cool, a dude wears pink, nah, that ain't me. But it was a knitted sweater that looked like it was knitted by their grandmother. It was very long, and by very long, it was like dress length. And then not only that, the arms literally were as long as the length of the sweater. So it went way beyond their hands. And they just looked so stupid and ridiculous. As a matter of fact, they looked like those blow up stupid things that are filled with air that when you drive by like a car parking lot, a car salesman parking lot. Oh, we got cars here. That's kind of what they looked like. The fucking floppy arms and shit. That's what they looked like. And when I saw that shit, I'm like, I didn't miss that shit. And if you notice, the dudes who are really into that shit, excuse me, the dudes who are really into that shit, they ain't winning shit. You notice that? They're usually all about their fashion. You know what? That's cool. You could be about your brand. I understand they got to do things outside of the NBA. But Jesus Christ, when you're walking into an NBA game, we don't need the fucking fashion show. And by the way, I have no issues with gay guys dressing like this, or trans people dressing like this, or drag queens dressing like that. Or even if you're a self-proclaimed weirdo, I have no issues with people dressing all weird and getting weird and doing different things with fashion. But it's annoying when I'm trying to watch an NBA game, and that's what I see walking into an NBA game. A dude in a pink sweater that his grandma knitted for him. Sorry. All right. And now we've got conference tournaments starting this week for college basketball. Sorry, got a fucking frog in my throat all of a sudden. And so I'm going to go ahead and break down not every single conference tournament because there's so many, but I'm going to break down the main ones where I think that are going to garner the most interest. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down every round. I'm going to pick who I think is going to win. I'm going to pick who I think is going to be the ultimate champion of that conference tournament. And then come Friday, I'll reevaluate where I'm at, let you know where I was wrong, let you know where I was right, and then just reevaluate how the weekend's going to go with college basketball. So let's start off with the Big 12 conference tournament because that's where my Longhorns reside. Hook 'em horns, motherfucker. And let's start off with the first round, which is basically the play-in for the two lowest seeds, which would be West Virginia versus Kansas State. I have West Virginia moving on. No particular reason, and any team that I'm picking, I'm not going to really give you a breakdown as to why I'm picking them. When it comes to these tournaments, hell, even March Madness, anything can happen. And, stats don't really matter. Records don't really matter. It's just a tournament, and shit, the team who gets a crazy shot off at the end is the winner sometimes. So it doesn't really, stats and all that kind of crap don't really matter. And where your seeding doesn't really matter either. So then moving on to the second round, we've got my Longhorns versus TCU. Of course, I'm picking Texas over them. But I really wouldn't be surprised if the Longhorns ended up losing to TCU. But I got the Longhorns going on to the next round at least. Then Kansas versus West Virginia. I have Kansas moving on. Then Oklahoma versus Baylor. I have Baylor moving on. And then Iowa State versus Texas Tech. I have Texas Tech moving on. Then the semifinal round would be Texas Tech versus Texas. I've got my Longhorns moving on, even though Texas Tech has had our number this year. But maybe that could just be one of those things that gives us a little bit of extra confidence going into this tournament. But I got Texas winning that one. And then I would have Kansas versus Baylor, and that's a spectacular matchup, by the way. But I have Baylor winning that one. Which would make the championship, Big 12 championship game be Texas versus Baylor. And that's when I would have my Longhorns losing to Baylor. I just think Baylor, they've got back into the groove. They had that little slump a couple weeks ago, but they seem to be back into the mold. And while I like my Longhorns, and they're playing good basketball, and they are a solid team, and I think they can make some noise come March Madness, but I don't know if they're a championship caliber team just yet. And Baylor are the defending champs. So I really think they're going to go ahead and take that win just because they're playing great basketball right now. And so I have Baylor as the Big 12 conference champions. And then moving on to the Pac-12 conference tournament. In the first round is Stanford versus Arizona State. I've got Arizona State moving on. Oregon State versus Oregon. I've got Oregon moving on. Cal versus Washington State. I've got Cal moving on. And then Utah versus Washington. I've got Washington moving on. Then the second round, it would be Arizona State versus Arizona, which I have Arizona moving on. Then Oregon versus Colorado. I have Oregon moving on. Cal versus UCLA. My second favorite college team, by the way. Got UCLA moving on. Playing great basketball, by the way. Another noisemaker in March Madness, just saying. And then Washington versus USC. I've got USC moving on. Then in the semifinal round, it would be Arizona versus Oregon. I've got Arizona moving on. And then UCLA versus USC. You know I'm picking UCLA in that one. And then for the championship would be Arizona versus UCLA. And I got UCLA upsetting in Arizona in that one. Both of these teams are playing great basketball. I just think UCLA has kind of gotten the shit end of the stick because at the beginning of the season, they really had some issues with COVID. A bunch of their games got canceled, and so they really weren't able to get started in the beginning of the season. But they've really turned it on towards the end of the season, and they're a really solid team. They've got some great players playing for them, although Arizona does as well. But I've got UCLA as the Pac-12 conference tourney champions. Then moving on to the SEC conference tourney. In the first round, basically the play-in for the lower seeds, Missouri versus Ole Miss. I have Missouri moving on. And then Vanderbilt versus Georgia. I've got Vanderbilt moving on. Then the next round would be Texas A&M versus Florida. I've got Florida moving on. LSU versus Missouri. LSU moving on. South Carolina versus Mississippi State. I've got South Carolina moving on. And then Alabama versus Vanderbilt. I've got Vanderbilt moving on. Then the next round would be Auburn versus Florida. I've got Auburn moving on. Arkansas versus LSU. I've got Arkansas moving on. Tennessee versus South Carolina. Tennessee moving on. And then Kentucky versus Vanderbilt. I've got Vanderbilt upsetting Kentucky in that one. Then to the semifinals, I have Auburn versus Arkansas. And then I have Auburn moving on. And then Tennessee versus Vanderbilt. And Tennessee moving on. And this would be another great matchup, especially in the SEC conference. Both Auburn and Tennessee having spectacular seasons this year, playing great basketball. But Auburn, I just think, is I think they're one of the front runners to actually win the championship this year. They haven't had a good couple of weeks, but I still think they're one of the best teams in college basketball, and I've got them winning the SEC conference tournament. And then moving on to the Big East conference tournament. In the first round is Xavier versus Butler. I've got Xavier moving on. St. John's versus DePaul. I've got St. John's moving on. And then Seton Hall versus Georgetown. I've got Seton Hall moving on. Then the next round would be Providence versus Xavier. I've got Providence moving on. Creighton versus Marquette. I've got Creighton moving on. Villanova versus St. John's. I've got Villanova moving on. And then UConn versus Seton Hall. I have UConn moving on. And then the semifinal round would be Providence versus Creighton, which I have Providence moving on. Villanova versus UConn. I have Villanova moving on. And then so the championship round would be Providence versus Villanova. Once again, two spectacular teams this entire college basketball season. Providence being kind of like the dark horse. And I wouldn't be surprised if they make some noise in March Madness as well, being kind of like one of those teams that just rolls on through and somehow makes the Final Four. Obviously, it's going to depend on what happens. But I do have Villanova actually winning the Big East Conference tournament, just in an upset fashion. Villanova, they're playing great basketball right now too. I want to say like the last month they've really got going, and so I really like what Villanova's doing, and I've got them as the Big East Conference champ. And then we're going to go ahead and end it with the ACC Conference tournament because it's the biggest one. And so the first round is Pittsburgh versus Boston College. I've got Pittsburgh. Then Clemson versus NC State. I've got Clemson moving on. And then Louisville versus Georgia Tech. I've got Georgia Tech moving on. Then the next round would be Florida State versus Syracuse. I've got Syracuse moving on. Pittsburgh versus Wake Forest. I've got Wake Forest moving on. Clemson versus Virginia Tech. I've got Virginia Tech moving on. And then Georgia Tech versus Virginia. I've got Virginia moving on. And then so the next round would be Duke versus Syracuse. I've got Duke moving on. Miami versus Wake Forest. I actually have Wake Forest upsetting Miami in that one. Notre Dame versus Virginia Tech. I have another upset right there. I've got Virginia Tech beating Notre Dame in that one. And then North Carolina versus Virginia. I have North Carolina moving on. And then the semifinal round would be Duke versus Wake Forest. I've got Duke moving on. And then Virginia Tech versus North Carolina. I have North Carolina moving on to set up a championship of Duke versus North Carolina, in which I think Duke's going to get some revenge for this last weekend, because if you didn't see it, Coach K's last game ended up being a complete bomb. North Carolina came in and absolutely upset this team, and it's funny just because, North Carolina's actually not that good this year. They're pretty good, but they're not that good. And Duke has been a ranked team all season long. It's Coach K's last season. And I mean, it was so funny because there were so many players who used to play for him in the building. There were so many celebrities in the building, just random celebrities who didn't even go to Duke. So the hot ticket that night was that ticket. And I was hearing that the college kids camped out for 3 months to hopefully get into this game, which is just nuts to me. I don't ever understand that shit, but hey, more power to you. But you all did that for just to see North Carolina come in and upset Duke. So I think Duke's going to get some revenge, and I think they're going to be the ACC Conference tourney champ, and give Coach K one last thing to add to the resume. And we'll see how they do in March Madness, because obviously they're going to make March Madness. But it was kind of funny to actually, I like Coach K, but it was kind of funny to see them. And they didn't just lose. They got their asses beat by North Carolina, a not very good North Carolina team. But hey, it's a rivalry. It's one of the deepest rivalries in not even just college basketball, but in sports in general. So anything can happen in those matchups. But it was really funny to actually kind of see that happen. And North Carolina just kind of shut everybody up. And then to see North Carolina players kind of have that chuckle, yeah, peace out, Coach K. We all respected you, but we got the last laugh there. But I think he could end up getting the last laugh here. If North Carolina goes that far, I mean, that's kind of more... they've got a shot, but I don't know if they're going to really make any noise this year at all, especially in March Madness. But hey, they did get at least can say that they spoiled Coach K's last game, and that they will have that forever and for always. So, yeah, that was our weekend in basketball, and like I said, we've got a whole bunch of college basketball this week, all the conference tournaments. Going all week long, all the ones that I listed off from the Big 12, Pac-12, SEC, Big East, and the ACC, they all start on Wednesday, and they will be going all the way through the weekend. Remember, whoever wins these conference tournaments championships, they are an automatic bid into March Madness. So if you happen to be one of these lower tiered seeds and you happen to get the upset, That's the easiest way into the tournament. Yeah, should be a very interesting week of college basketball. And then we will have March Madness coming our way next week. So let's see what happens with the conference tournaments this week, and we'll recap on Friday and see how right or wrong I end up being. And I will talk to you fools on Friday. Peace out, homies.